Hi guys, today I'm going to talk about mirrorless cameras versus DSLR cameras. Now, I've been putting off getting a mirrorless camera for some years now because I really just didn't want to commit to it because I really like the concept of a DSLR, but the industry is definitely moving towards mirrorless and away from DSLRs, and it's kind of at that inflection point where most people that are buying new cameras are certainly going to be buying the newer mirrorless format. So inevitably, I'm probably going to get one of these anyway, so I went ahead and got what I might consider an upgrade to the current camera that I've been using for quite a while now. So what I want to do is just talk about what I like about the mirrorless camera and what I don't like about the mirrorless camera in reference to where I've come from. So I'm going to be kind of talking through where did I come from in terms of photography, where did I really get my start and what I've been doing for the last 25 years or so, and talk about that kind of history. Then I'm going to compare and contrast the two cameras that I primarily use now, and then I'm going to show you some sample photos of what I've taken in the last week or so from the R7 and show you kind of how its features really do bring out some life in the photography that I typically do. So this slide kind of represents my history with Canon cameras. Now, my exposure to photography certainly started before I ever bought my first camera. I had some early exposure to some of the first point shoots that were available in the digital space because my school had a few of them, and because I knew the technology folks at the school fairly well, they were like, Blaze, just come and take the camera anytime you want to. And I used it for a lot of school projects as well as some personal projects as well. And I would just take photos with a digital camera, and it would be like PowerPoint or websites or whatever, things like that. Now, at the same time, I was very interested in film photography because I had taken a class on film photography and got interested in that as an art media. And I was debating on whether or not I would go into film or whether I'd go into digital. Now, I could kind of see where digital was going, but at the time I was getting into it, it really hadn't gotten to the point where it was a kind of a serious art form. So I went with film. And I bought my first film camera in the late 90s with the 35 millimeter Rebel G. So 25 years ago, I got my first film camera. Now, this particular camera right here was just kind of a consumer-oriented 35 millimeter film camera. The camera itself was not very costly. I didn't spend a lot of money on the camera. I didn't spend a lot of money on the lenses. The film, on the other hand, because I shot so much film, was really where I spent a lot of the money. Buying film and then turning around and turning that film into photos, it was where you spent a ton of cash with this kind of photography. So I probably spent way more on developing film than I ever did on the camera gear itself. So whenever the digital Rebel came out, I was very eager to get my hands on one of these because it gave me the SLR experience, but in a digital fashion. So this one, they announced it. I was like, sign me up. Where can I get this camera? I will easily justify the cost in what I save on film and developing film with this digital camera. Now, of course, film was a superior media at the time in terms of dynamic range and other features, but still, because I was taking so many photos, I really just wanted something that I could do. I could do volume of photos, I could do quantity over quality, and really focus in on trying to develop the craft by taking lots of photos. And that's where the digital Rebel just kind of ticked all those boxes. And so this one at 6.3 megapixels might seem paltry by today's standards, but it was absolutely revolutionary at the time. It was double or triple that what was typically common in a point and shoot of that time and space. And so I got one of these. It had the crop sensor, of course. It was my first DSLR. And the digital Rebel itself was quite revolutionary because it was kind of the first digital SLR that was consumer oriented, that was accessible to guys like me that weren't pros, that didn't want to spend thousands and thousands of dollars on a digital SLR, but wanted something to take digital photos with that would work with whatever kind of lenses they had purchased already. And this one kind of fit the bill. So I bought it. And after that, I was taking tons and tons and tons of photos with this thing. And I quickly ran into the limitations of what this camera would do. It was pretty slow. So you could only do like 2 or 3 bursts at a time. You could burst like 2 or 3 photos before the buffer would fill up, and you have to wait for it to write to the card. And it basically required you to reset between every take. And so if I wanted to take a photo, I had to take it, refocus, reframe, take, refocus, reframe, take. And so you couldn't take a bunch of photos in quick succession. And it was also kind of slow on boot up. So if you saw a shot and you was like, oh, there's a shot, you'd have to Oh, wait for the camera to boot. That took about 5 seconds. Oh, the shot's gone. And so things like that made this camera somewhat limited. And so I was kind of willing to live with the limitations of this, even though I knew that better cameras were coming out, though, because they were coming out in quick succession. The technology was evolving very quickly between 2004 and 2008. Canon was releasing new cameras every 12 months. They were releasing their successor to the Digital Rebel. I think it was the Rebel XT, and then they released the 10D and the 20D, the 30D and the 40D and the 50D, all within that 4-year time frame. And so every 12 months they were coming out with something new, and it was usually significantly better than the prior generation. So when the 50D landed, I thought, okay, this is the camera that kind of answers all of the problems that I have with the Rebel, but it also gives me something that is certainly going to be kind of, I would say, future-proof in a lot of ways, because it did a lot of the things that I was doing well. For instance, bursting. It had a burstable frame. It could take like 15 or 30 shots. I can't remember the exact number, but it could take several shots and buffer those while staying in focus. It had the AI servo mode. It was one of the first cameras to have that feature where you could just hold the button and then it would stay in focus while the subject was moving around. So you could pan real easy with it, or if the subject was running to you, it would stay in focus, or running away from you, it would stay in focus. So I was doing a lot of photos of like animals and children playing on playgrounds, and like my nephews and nieces at the time. And then I was doing portraiture, and I was doing all kinds of different photos with this camera, with my Digital Rebel. And this one would do those kinds of pictures easily. And so I was very eager to get my hands on one of these. And so I did. I sold my Digital Rebel, got the 50D, and didn't look back. So I was glad I kind of struck while the iron was hot here, because over the next 8 years, Canon did not evolve this particular line very much. In fact, the 60 and 70D came out years after the 50D and did. So there was bigger gaps in time. So the 50D didn't get a replacement for several years, and then the 60D came out, and it was not a big upgrade to the 50. So I was like, it's not that big of an upgrade. I really don't see a reason to buy an upgrade. So I didn't. And the same with the 70D. And then the 80D came out, and that's when I decided to upgrade. But between that, I bought this digital point and shoot, because I want to mention this one, because this was really kind of one of the first cameras that I saw that I had, and that was mine, that kind of had a lot of the features that we find on modern mirrorless cameras. In fact, this particular camera had the articulating view screen on the back. You could flip it out. It also had a digital viewfinder that you could look through. It had the pop-up flash, of course. It had a hot shoe for a speed light flash. It gave you full control over the experience. So you could set the aperture, you could set the shutter speed, you could set the ISO, and it had a really powerful lens on it. This particular lens right here was like a 28 to 500 millimeter equivalent of what you get on a 35 millimeter. Now, my wife wanted to point and shoot, something that was simple. I was hoping that I could teach her to appreciate DSLR. She was kind of intimidated by the size and the interchangeable lenses and all the knobs and dials on that. She wasn't sure what to do with it. She just wanted a camera where she could point and shoot, put it on programmable mode. And I hope that she would learn the various features of a digital SLR by using this point and shoot. She never really did, but at the same time, this was just a nice camera to have laying around, because this one also did video, and it served as a camcorder as well. So we bought this camera, and we still have it. It's laying around somewhere. I have no idea where it is, but I see it every now and then. So, oh yeah, it's a camera we bought like 15 years ago. But in any case, we kept these, the 50D and this X10IS, well, even with the image stabilizer, yeah, that was an advanced feature at the time, for a while, until the 80D came out. Now, I was hesitant to buy even the 80D because the 50D was just such a great camera. It still is. Now, I debated on whether or not to get the 80D, but around the same time, I was getting into doing video production. I was doing a lot of YouTube content, and so I wanted a camera that would do video as well. And so the 80D did video. It shot 1080p video at 60 frames per second. So I ended up getting the 80D primarily to do video with, but also to give me a slight upgrade on the 50D as well for photography. So over there, I set this guy on a tripod on a stand, and I used it for video. I bought some video oriented lenses, and I've used it to shoot hours and hours and hours of digital content. Now I'm not shooting it today. I'm using a webcam because I wanted to show you the camera on the camera. And so I'm not using it for video today, but I've shot hundreds of videos using that camera. And I would occasionally use it for photography if I was traveling or whatnot. But if I was going to shoot something around town, like we're going to the park or we're going to the museum or something like that, I wouldn't take down that camera from the video setup. I would take it down. I would just leave it up, and I would just grab the 50D and put my lenses on this and use this for just taking photos. Because again, this is even by today's standards, it still takes great pictures. I still love this camera and still use it just because it's just a great workhorse type camera. It works great as a secondary camera for a lot of things. And so I use it for that purpose still. And like I said, I did this one mostly for video, but still use this one for doing a lot of just portraiture and things like that. Now, another 8 years passed, and now I was at the point where I was looking for an upgrade to the photography experience. I looked at the 90D. I said, that's not a big upgrade from the 80D. And so I was like, I'm just going to have to capitulate and go into getting a mirrorless camera. I really liked the DSLR concept because for a lot of reasons we'll talk about in a minute, but I was debating on which mirrorless camera to get. And so being in the Canon camp, I looked at like the R10, I looked at the R8, and I ended up settling on the R7, mainly because it was kind of the natural successor to a lot of the cameras that I've had in the past. It had the crop sensor. It had a lot of the same kinds of features that the 50D was known for. It had the crop sensor too, because a lot of the lenses I bought were EFS lenses. And it had the built-in image stabilizer. It had the burstable mode. It had a lot of the kind of features that I like for high-speed photography. And so I ended up going with the R7 over the R8, even though the R8 was probably better for low-light photography. It was a full-frame camera and so on. But I went with the R7 because it just kind of worked better for the kind of photography that I typically do. And so I bought it to do photography with. It's explicitly bought with the purpose of doing photography, not video, although I will probably eventually transition to using this one for video if I get into doing a lot of 4K video, which I haven't done that yet. Although this one will shoot 4K, I really haven't adopted 4K for YouTube content as of right now. So that's the history of my cameras that I've bought over the last 25 years. And so I want to talk now about why I like digital SLRs and compare that to the mirrorless camera that I have now and talk about these two side by side. So I'm going to talk about mirrorless versus DSLR now. Now, this is where I get into some things that are more subjective because my experience the last 20 years up till recently has been with the DSLR. My SLR camera, and then I got in 1999, I got my first digital SLR 20 years ago, and I've had a couple of since then. And I've only recently got into the mirrorless space, even though mirrorless cameras have been out for a while now. But even so, I want to talk about these two kind of in comparison to one another because I really am not completely sold on the idea of a mirrorless camera yet. I feel like in a lot of ways when using the R7 that I'm using a point and shoot because of the electronic viewfinder. I just, for some reason, have not been able to get used to this yet. It still feels very much like I'm using a point and shoot, not a SLR camera. Even as nice as it is, I still like the analog viewfinder. My 80D has one, the 50D, the Digital Rebel did, and my Rebel G did. They all had an analog viewfinder. I'm looking through the lens at the natural light coming through the prism to my eye. And that experience was what made a 35 millimeter stand apart from just a point and shoot film camera and also point and shoot digital cameras, was the fact that you had that analog viewfinder and it had a mirror that would flip up and down. And the fact that mirrorless cameras don't have that makes you use this electronic viewfinder that, like I mentioned, was introduced on some of the earlier Canon cameras like the SX10IS that I mentioned a minute ago. And it just doesn't feel natural to me. And so I'm learning to adjust to it, because inevitably the DSLRs won't be around anymore. I'm just going to have to get used to it, but I just can't feel like I'm looking through the lens anymore. I'm looking at some representation of what the lens is seeing. So just something to get used to. But because it has an electronic viewfinder, that opens up a lot of possibilities of what you can do. For instance, the two things that I just really like about the R7 is that it has this IBIS feature, and that it has just some crazy burst rates and buffer. Now, the in-body image stabilizer was one of the main reasons I went with this camera over like the R8. The R8 costs about the same, and it's probably better for low light photography, but this one had that IBIS feature that works well for a lot of the kind of photography that I do, which is like shooting animals like dogs, and I also take lots of pictures of kids, or I tried doing some macro photography the other day, and I'm still working on that. Or otherwise doing things that require me to have the hand camera in my hand, not on a tripod, and I'm shooting something as it moves, or I'm moving around quite a bit. So having that in-body image stabilizer allows me to use a lot of my older non-image stabilized lenses with the R7, and it still has the ability to do image stabilization even with non-image stabilized lenses. Now combine that with image stabilized lenses and you get even better results. And so I have a few of those that I've used it with, and it's pretty nice. I'll be honest. It's just one of those things that really made this camera stand out over the R8. The other thing that I really like about this, because it has an electronic viewfinder, is that fact that it has like the electronic shutter and the electronic curtain that make burst rates insanely high in this thing over what you would typically be able to do on something like a DSLR. And so this one has like 15 frames per second on burst photography. So with this R7, I can basically get something in the frame, press the button, and it will fill the buffer up. Well, I think it holds like 30 or 40 pictures on bursting photos in RAW to the buffer, and it would shoot. And so I get lots and lots of possible subjects that I could use, especially if I have a photo that is in focus and that's well composed, and I want a lot of options that I can kind of work with. Bursting with that thing just gives me a ton of media, a lot of media to work with. And so it's really nice for that. And that is useful for things like taking pictures of my kiddos, or taking pictures of animals, wildlife photography, doing weddings. I used to do a lot more weddings. I haven't done one in quite a while because I haven't been in photography in a minute. But if I was doing wedding photography, having a feature like that where you're capturing moments that people will cherish for the rest of their life, again, bursting, getting thousands of, or hundreds or thousands of pictures just by pressing the button down, is something that is certainly a feature of these new mirrorless cameras that just weren't possible on DSLRs. Another thing I like about this one, and it's been available on other cameras for a while, is the fact that you can stick two cards into it. And this is nice if you're shooting, like, again, precious moments type experiences like weddings, and you want to capture those moments and preserve them, and without having to worry about the card getting corrupted. Having that second card is just kind of as a backup is nice to have. Now, I put these over here in black on the 80D, not because these are things that I'm discounting the 80D as marks against it. Rather, they just weren't available whenever I got the 80D, because the 80D was in a particular band of that Canon was selling at the time, and they didn't put two card slots into these particular cameras. That was available on some of the high-end cameras, but not on the prosumer cameras like I typically buy. And they didn't have decent burst rates for the time, and the 50D certainly did too. And it didn't have the built-in image stabilization. That didn't become available till much later as well. But these two features on the mirrorless were kind of what were what got me thinking about it, and the burst and the higher burst rate. Like I said, that was a nice to have as well. Now, the one thing that I don't like about these new mirrorless cameras is they don't have a pop-up flash. And then I was like, why did they remove the pop-up flash? I know that people don't think about that as a nice to have feature. People complain about, oh, the pop-up flash. But I'll be honest, I don't like screwing on a speed light every time I want to use flash. I mean, sometimes it was just nice to have, oh, this photo, could you really use a little bit of flash here? Pop up, take the photo with a flash, and it works great, especially when I don't have my speed light with me. This one, this particular photo camera right here was when I took a photo that's hanging in my living room right now. My wife and I, we were on vacation once, and there was this really nice fall foliage in the background. I said that would make a great photo, and a great portrait photo, nice backdrop, and with bokeh. Well, I put my 50 millimeter lens, hit the pop-up flash, set the timer, and ran instead in front of the camera. The flash lit us up really nicely, and then it nicely exposed the background, and I have a really nice photo because of the pop-up flash on the camera. And that's not the only one I've ever used it for, but having it available just was one of those things that I was like, why didn't they include it? It didn't seem like it would be that much of a stretch to include a pop-up flash. But now we have the hot shoe that will work with a speed light, but there's no pop-up flash on this thing, and I'm just kind of wishing that they would include it. But all that to say is that's one feature I like about the digital SLR over the mirrorless. So that's really not a big deal. But again, the biggest problem I have with these mirrorless cameras is the electronic viewfinder, and I'm just going to have to get used to it. But it's going to take some getting used to. But otherwise, a great camera. And so let me show you some sample photos I've taken with the R7 to talk about some of these points, and show you what I'm talking about with what you can do with this thing that would probably not be possible with like even my 80D or my 50D with some of these features that are available on the R7. So this is the first image I want to show, and this one was shot at 417 millimeters at 5.63 on 1/160th of a second. I shot it on this big old long lens right here, and this is 50 to 500 lens from Sigma, and it's a really nice lens for doing action kind of photography as well as nature photography or wildlife photography. And I just saw my dog running in the backyard, and I was like, I'm going to try it on the mirrorless, and it took a nice photo with that built-in in-body image stabilizer, and the focus is kind of right here around his eyes, which you can kind of see that it's getting a little soft right here on his nose. You can definitely tell it's getting soft back there by his ears, but the overall effect worked really well, and it allowed me to take this at a shutter speed that wouldn't typically be possible whenever you're using a long lens like this, unless you're using like some kind of mount like a monopod or a tripod or something similar to that. So a nice photo there, nice sharp, everything's in focus where you want it to be. It's just a great photo demonstrating the capabilities of the mirrorless camera. So I like that. This one was a little bit rough. This one was taken with the same lens. I put a 2x multiplier on it and extended it out to 700 millimeters. And it was at f11 at 1/100th of a second. This is of a little bird landing on the bird feeder. The focus is kind of soft right here where you want it to be. It's mostly kind of right here, and you can kind of see it on the tip of this tail and right there. But this photo is not the greatest one in the world, but it did allow me to see what was possible with a long zoom at a fairly small aperture at a slow shutter speed with that built-in image stabilization. So this thing is able to compensate for several stops of light that might not be available by allowing you to hold the camera still enough to get a decent photo of something that's far away under challenging lighting conditions using a slower shutter speed, because it's compensating that using that built-in image stabilization technology. This is when I was playing with macro photography. Again, not the best image in the world. I was playing with macro photography just because I'd never done that before. I thought I would give it a shot, and this one, it was decently sharp. It was not the best, most sharp images. It kind of fades off right here on his wing. And right here, it's decently sharp, kind of in this area right here, and then kind of on its back. And this was a bee hanging on a flower. And so I wanted to try to get this where everything was in focus. And so I took a lens and dialed it down to like f13 and try to rely on the in-body image stabilizer and it help compensate for that. And then at 130 millimeters, it just wasn't the most well executed photo in the world, but I'm still learning how to do this whole macro thing. So this one turned out okay for what I was working with at the time. I'm gonna have to practice on this more to get better results. And there's one of the moon I took a few weeks ago. We had a nice full moon out, and I wanted to take the R7 out and try it out with some astrophotography. Just, well, taking a picture of the moon. I guess it's technically astrophotography. And I put it on the tripod, set it at 1000 millimeters, f11 at 1/1000th of a second, and just took a bunch of pictures of the moon, and well, it looks like the moon. Decently sharp photos. They were not the best photos I've ever taken, but you can kind of get the gist of what I was going for there, and tried to capture the photo, make sure everything was sharp, and make sure the exposure was right, and all that. One of the challenges of taking a photo of the moon is the exposure, because it's really pretty homogeneous. It's not a lot of contrast between the mare, which are these kind of darker regions, and then some of the craters, and then some of these I don't know what these are called, but these bands that are coming off of some of these craters right here, that Tycho crater right there. These tend to be very bright, but this mare tends to be a little darker. And when you actually take the photo, that's not always obvious. And so it's not a lot of contrast. So autofocus doesn't always work really well whenever you're doing a picture of the moon. So you might have to manually focus it. And I was able to use the viewfinder screen to zoom in pretty close and then manually adjust the focus on this particular photo until I got it to where I thought I might like it. And then snapped a bunch of photos, and I got this one right here. So to sum it all up, I'm still kind of on the fence about the whole mirrorless thing. I'm not fully convinced that it's the way to go, but given that that's where the industry is going, I'm just going to have to get used to that fact that it's not going to be what I would like to be as a analog viewfinder is kind of what I have just been used to for many years. But that aside, I do like some of these new features that are coming out on some of these mirrorless cameras, like the in-body image stabilizer and the insanely high burst rates that you can get with digital cameras like the one I have, and other things like that that open up a lot of possibilities that just weren't possible with something like a DSLR. So all that to say is, yes, I'm on the fence about it, but don't let me convince you to buy one or not to buy one. I'm only one person, and my experience is somewhat limited with this, but still, I'm learning just like everybody else is. And if this helps to inform you whether to wait or to go ahead and buy one of these, certainly take it with that. And I hope that you like the content and that you will subscribe to the channel and like this video and share with your friends if they're interested in this topic as well.
If you like this content, please consider subscribing to the channel by clicking on the subscribe button. You can also like this content by clicking on the thumbs up, or share this content with your friends, and also comment in the comment section down below. You can also find me online at www.blaze.net or on Twitter at @TheOneMule. And as always, thanks for watching.